Hello, everyone. I am thrilled to be here with Sonja Lyubomirsky, and she's going to talk about her really wonderful new book, How to Feel Loved: The Five Mindsets That Get You More Out of What Matters Most. Sonja, thank you so much for being here with us.
Such a pleasure to be here with you. It's been a while.
Yes, I
Yeah.
know. I always love to see you, especially at our MAP events. And I have been following your research for decades now and reading your research. And after reading this book, and I'm so happy that we're able to really dive deep into the book today because it is really a wonderful book that has moved me deeply. And so what is wonderful is that after and what dawned on me is that I have been reading your research for decades and that you've kind of after distilling all of this and after doing research not just here in North America, but you're so good at doing research all around the world, and it seems to me like you must have amassed this wonderful understanding of what it means to be human.
Mm.
And is this book kind of a declaration or a distillation that what you have learned about happiness has so deeply to do with love, being loved, loving, and being loved?
Yeah, you really hit the nail on the head. Like, I really feel like everything clicked, after all these years of research. And I feel like it's the best work that I've ever done. My co author, Harry Reis, who's a prominent relationship scientist, also says the same thing. Everything just kind of clicked. And, one way I summarize it is most of my career I spent doing happiness interventions, right? My lab pioneered kind of happiness interventions in 1998, right? 27 years ago, or something like that. And, uh, and we do all these interventions, sort of basically clinical trials to test whether, expressing gratitude or doing acts of kindness or, being optimistic, being more social makes people happier. And it hit me one day, I guess a few years ago, that almost all of the interventions that work to make us happier, the reason they work is that they make us feel more connected to and loved by others, right? So when I write a gratitude letter to my best friend, I feel more loved by her, right? When I do an act of kindness for my family member, I feel closer and more loved by them, right? Now, you could argue, yes, there's some happiness practices, maybe physical exercise or meditation, that don't necessarily have to do anything about connection or love, although even those you could argue some often do. But most of the time, it's about feeling connected and loved. And many of us are loved, but we don't necessarily feel loved, right? So yeah, it really is a distillation that is the most important factor in happiness, the most important sort of ingredient of happiness
Yeah.
and being human.
That is really great.
Yeah.
And I know for me, for example, I felt that way too in reading the book that I always feel like I've been a loving person, but I don't always feel loved. So I was excited to jump in and say, oh, Sonia's going to recommend all of these evidence based tools and practices on how I can feel more loved. And really, the paradox that unfolded in the book
Mhm.
is that the most direct path toward feeling loved is to make someone else feel loved first, which was that was a surprise to me. But was that a surprise to you going into this?
A little bit too, a little bit. And by the way, and I've had the same experience where I had a family member where I felt like not that loved by her. And I thought, what do most of us think? We think, oh, we need to make ourselves somehow more lovable, right? Like, or show off how great we are, how kind and funny and interesting and smart, or somehow change something about the other person, right, to make them love us more. But really, it's about, yeah, the first step is to make the other person feel more loved, to sort of really show, authentic interest in their inner life, really listen to them, really, like, help them to share yourself. And so yeah, there's a lot more to say about that, but that felt a little bit counterintuitive at first.
It
Yeah.
is, but I
But
think
it's also,
very
yeah.
helpful. Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
also empowering. It's also empowering
Yes.
because it means that feeling loved is actually under our control, that we can actually Yeah, because otherwise it feels like, I don't know, I can't change the other person. How do I make them love me more, or feel loved more? But yeah, it's under our control to feel more loved and to make the other person feel more loved. Yeah.
And what's great is the book actually gives you a formula. And as I read, I call it the formula, the 5 different mindsets that you talk about, because it makes it very easy to understand simple things that I can be doing to feel more loved and to allow my friends, my family, and other people around me to feel more loved. Sharing, listening to learn, curiosity, multiplicity, living with an open heart. And I really like how, can you share more about this formula and again, that how did that unfold for you and Harry?
Yeah, yeah, it was a lot of conversations, and I should mention this was a 7-year process. For 5 of the 7 years, Harry and I, kept writing and rewriting our book proposal, and we kept, sending it to our agent, who kept sending it back, and I think and the agent could never quite say how to change it, but I think he sort of, it's like he knew it when he saw it, and finally after 5 years, we're like, okay, we got this, and actually one of the key moments came in talking to my daughter, who was about 12 or 13 at the time. She's 14 now, where she really helped me come up with one of the main metaphors of the book, which we call the relationship seesaw. Um, and I'll kind of back up by saying the key insight, really, that we had, that Harry and I had, is that to feel loved, you need to be known and to truly know the other person, sort of that the other person really knows me and I really know them. And one way to think about it is that, like, if you don't, Louisa, if you don't really know me, I I I won't really probably ever feel loved by you, because I'll always wonder, if you really knew me, maybe you wouldn't love me, right? So, like, you really need to be known, and also know the other, and so that requires us kind of taking our walls down a little bit, because we all kind of walk around with walls around us, um, and so a lot of the book, I mean, sort of that formula is how to help us take our walls down a little bit, lower our walls, lower my walls, lower your walls, right? So I help lower your walls by showing genuine curiosity in you, in your inner life, in the details of your day, in sort of what's going on with you, asking you questions. Research shows that we don't ask enough questions of each other, especially deep questions. Nick Epley at University of Chicago, he has this beautiful research program. And he shows that people think that it'll be awkward or
Yeah.
uncomfortable to ask deep questions of each other, right? Because other people will think that we're prying or that we're nosy, right? And actually, maybe that's true once in a while, but on average, like, we want to be asked. We crave to be known, right? We want people to know about our inner life, I mean, at a good pace, of course, not like too much right away. And so by showing curiosity, and then once you start opening up a little bit, you start lowering your walls a little bit, I really listen, right? I listen, and not just to respond. We say listen to learn, not listen to respond. Most of us are listening to kind of and rehearsing the next thing we want to say.
Yeah.
Um, and then that's going to inspire you and move you to sort of share more of your story. And then it's going to inspire you to reciprocate, because reciprocity is one of the most powerful rules of social behavior. And hopefully you'll reciprocate and then really listen to my story and really and show curiosity in me and help me open up as well.
When you first mentioned the relationship seesaw in the
Yeah.
book, I thought, okay, where is she going with this? And but then when you describe it, this feeling of, because when you're on a seesaw, that if you put your full weight on your side of the seesaw, that the other person is uplifted. But it's this idea of, I'm getting to know you more, I'm learning more about you, so I see more of you as
Exactly. It's like we're
as
all, yeah, we're all kind of
receiving.
icebergs a little bit. Like, most of us are sort of under the water, and I don't really
Yes.
see most of you. I only see kind of the top, right? But if I show curiosity and warmth and acceptance and I'm listening, I'm like sort of pressing down on the seesaw, and I'm helping you lift up a little bit out and show more of your full self.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so when I got to the part in the book about curiosity and using curiosity in a way that does this, that helps me see the other person, it
Mhm.
reminded me of a conversation that I had at Burning Man, actually. So I had a friend of mine, David,
Mhm.
and one day we were just sitting there in the mess tent where we normally have breakfast, and he just started to ask me some very thoughtful questions about positive psychology. And he knew that positive psychology was my world. He didn't know me very well, but he knew positive psychology was my world. And then he just started to ask me all of these very thoughtful, curious questions about what is positive psychology. And then he built on that question as I answered. And we spent about 90 minutes. And after that conversation, I realized, wow, he really cares to know me. He wants to know me because of this deep level of curiosity. And to this day, that was several years ago, and I still remember that interaction with my friend David.
Mm. Yeah, and isn't that amazing how compelling and powerful that is, that and how rare it is? And I often ask, like when I give talks, I'll ask the audience, I'll say, when was the last time someone showed true, real powerful curiosity in you that you could just tell they just couldn't wait for you to answer their questions, to tell your story. And it's actually not very common. And it's one reason actually we love charismatic people, right? Because people who are charismatic are they make you feel like you're the only person in the room. They're really, really genuinely interested. And then I also often think about a lot of people, often the stereotype is older people, but it doesn't have to be anything to do with age. Sometimes people will tell you like all the details of their day, right? They're going on like I ran this errand and then this happened and this went wrong, or often it's like I took this flight and it was late. And it's really actually kind of boring, right, to listen to all those details. And yet it makes you realize like people really want others to know, about their sort of inner life, about those details. And so when someone is truly interested, it is incredibly powerful.
Another thing that I found powerful for me is the idea of multiplicity. Because and so where my mind went is multiplicity in dating. Because here's the background on this. We go on these dating sites and we have sort of a checklist what we're looking for, right? And does this person meet all of these things? And let me find out quick enough so that either I have to stay with this person or move on. It seems so horrible, actually, when you think about the whole experience. But, when it comes to that dating, I found I don't really have this multiplicity. It's sort of like when I figure this piece out, oh, I don't know if I can live with that. And therefore, that box doesn't get checked. So therefore, it's time to move on.
Mhm.
So it made me think maybe I should allow for more multiplicity.
Mhm.
Especially when I'm dating, and maybe to know what things are deal breakers and what things maybe I can work with and
Exactly,
what is
exactly.
not.
I love multiplicity, I'm going to say a little bit more about what we mean by the multiplicity mindset. Something that you want to embrace when you trying to make someone else feel loved or make yourself feel loved. And so, but I want to say a word about dating because I also have lots of experience with dating. And we talk about this in the book actually towards the end. There's research by Chip Nee, Knee, and he says there's sort of two approaches to dating, and one is called filtering and one is called cultivating. And most of us do filtering, right, which is that we have these check boxes and we're sort of finding the one by finding the person who fits those check boxes, right? So like they check 9 out of 10 boxes, whatever. And so that's called filtering. Cultivating is actually where you actually build the relationship that you want to have, like you sort of help that person become the person that you want to date. And I mean, I would say a huge caveat, which I think there's a huge age, factor here, is that maybe there's a way when you're younger, you really can like really change a lot together. And maybe by a certain age, it's harder to, right, to have that person change. Anyway, so I wanted to sort of bring that up, filtering versus cultivating. But multiplicity is like thinking of both yourself and the other person in this idea that we're all multitude. We're not one thing. We are not defined by one trait, by one behavior. We're like a quilt of many qualities, both positive and negative. And of course we know this to be true. So I'm generous often, but sometimes I'm selfish, and sometimes I'm loyal, and sometimes I'm narcissistic. And we all have those qualities. And so to recognize that that's okay, that's human. in ourselves and others. And so not let one, so if someone does something kind of a bad behavior or they have a trait you don't like, it doesn't define them, right? It doesn't, you don't define
Right.
the person by that one trait. By the way, it doesn't mean that you want to necessarily have that person as your partner or your best friend, depending on what that trait is. But really seeing people in like this, their full messy complexity, I think it really, ever since I've started thinking more about multiplicity, it really has changed my view of humans in general. It's made me less judgmental. I think we're all kind of judgmental. Maybe that's evolutionarily adaptive to sort of judge people, to know like, is this someone who should be like I should form an alliance with, right? Or I should be friends with or mate with, as opposed to be my enemy, right? But yeah, but I think if everyone's judgmental, it probably we'd all do well to be a little bit less judgmental.
And I think we can use that more in this kind
Mhm.
of, political environment that we're in right now. That if only we could see people not as one thing, but as many things, that perhaps that might open us up. And
Absolutely, yeah,
yeah,
and actually the mindsets that I talk about, it's completely applicable to sort of the polarized environment that we're in. So, like, when I'm talking to someone who has very different political views, I mean, it's very hard to be like, I don't understand them at all. It just makes no sense to me, but to really listen and to show curiosity, like, "Gee, why do you believe that?" "Why do you support that person?" But truly show curiosity, and to truly listen and to share. In fact, there's been interventions where when people share personal details about themselves, they're able to sort of befriend people who are very different from them.
and I
Yeah.
think sometimes it's a choice too, with, I have family members that have very different political views, and we just don't talk about that because I love these people so much. It's not a factor in our relationship at all. So
Yeah.
I make that choice. The another thing that you talk about in the relationship side of things too is the power of forgiveness and being able to forgive people. Even with multiplicity, there is this idea that even if somebody there's a transgression, that we can forgive and we can perhaps maybe repair the relationship. And I know, um, I'll give you some context. The late Susan Nolan Hoxema talked a lot about rumination. This idea of overthinking. When things happen, and so I won a gold medal in the rumination Olympics in the 90s because I just ruminated like crazy. And when I discovered that it was a real contributor to female depression, especially female depression, I thought I need to train myself on how to stop ruminating. And I did. And I wrote a course. And as part of that course, I did some research on why are these women ruminating, these women who are coming into my course, why are they ruminating? A lot of them were ruminating over an
Yeah.
injustice that had taken place. And I found for me, letting go of an injustice, forgiveness was so powerful to let go of that injustice and that whole process of forgiving. Doesn't mean I'm condoning what the person did, but just being, I found forgiveness a powerful way to let go.
Mhm.
And yet, I find with some people that I talk about this concept with, they're not able to forgive. They say, "I can't forgive that person. They wronged me, and there's no way in my life I'll ever forgive." Have you? I'm just curious. Have you ever thought, how can we help people forgive and maybe call it something else? Like,
Yeah.
what is the power of forgiveness, and can we call it something else in
I
terms of the
I
process? I
love
guess.
that question. I think we definitely need a different term because that's often happens, right? When a particular, yeah, word has all these connotations. I have a couple of responses. So first of all, thank you for bringing up Susan Olin Huxama, who was one of my graduate advisors when I was a grad student. Love her so much, and we stayed in touch, for a long time until her death in 2013. Um, and so yeah, and so I'm also did research on rumination. So yeah, so first of all, I want to say that it's totally normal, human, adaptive to ruminate about sort of, I guess, what I would call kind of like unfinished business. It's also called the Zygarnik effect. When something's sort of unresolved, you keep ruminating about it, like an injustice, or someone does something and you just don't understand it, or you can't understand. Like, you don't want to live in a world where such injustices occur, right? And so you keep ruminating about it. So that's totally normal. and even adaptive, right? So it's just become sort of unhealthy when it's chronic and you just can't stop, right? It's actually affecting your day-to-day life. And I know people, including myself, I had this experience with a person in my life that I just would not forgive. And I just said to myself, I know it's making me less happy that I'm not forgiving, and I'm just going to accept that. And actually, that's okay to actually just accept it as long as you're aware of that you're doing it because you're hurting yourself more than the other person. Um, Eventually, I actually like I'll just say I did a mushroom journey where which is kind of almost like a cliche. But really, I realized that I need to forgive this person, who's a very important person in my life, and I did, and I think I am. We're all kind of better off that I did. Anyway, so that's a personal story. But yeah, like it's so hard to let go. And what you said about forgiveness is not condoning, it's not pardoning, it's not excusing, it's not justifying. It's just something you do for yourself. It is basically. And maybe we use the word multiplicity. It's that you don't define that person just by that behavior, that transgression, and that you see them in their messy complexity. And that's actually what helped me forgive is I saw it was a male person. I saw kind of the little boy inside the man and that little boy that was so threatened and insecure that made the man do what he did. And so and often actually now this is actually my new perspective. Sometimes my friends actually this happened to me recently, or a friend said to me, "Can you believe what this person did? You know, what he said." And it was pretty awful what he did and said. And I immediately saw the little boy or the teenager, that was so insecure that made him, and again, it's not excusing, it's not condoning, it's not justifying. But it sort of helps you understand. You still may not want to hang out with that person, but it helps you to understand that everyone in their messy complexity, there's a reason, and I had a coach, sorry to keep on talking. I had this coach who was just so wise, and she said to me once, she's like, we're all kind of like, if that person could do better, they would. Like they're at their capacity, right? And they just cannot do better. And I know that sounds like an excuse, but it helps you understand. It's like if that person could say, I had a person in my life who just would refuse to apologize. I'm like, how hard is it to apologize? And they're like, that person just is not capable of apologizing. Right now, they cannot do it. They're at capacity. So anyway, it really helps to see people in their messy complexities.
I remember thinking about that even with my mom because I had a very loving relationship with my mom, but there were certain things that kind of held me back from having a deeper relationship with my mom. And I remember having that moment thinking, she doesn't have the capacity to show up the way you need her to show up, and that's okay. That's all right. She doesn't have that capacity. And once I was able to just see her in that kind of messiness, and now as a mother, realizing more and more that I have my own flaws that I'm bringing into my relationship with my children, I was able to have that kind of compassion with her.
Yeah.
So another thing that I guess I wanted to bring up is thank you for addressing the love languages thing that, never seen any research around that. And I thought, what is this? But it seems to deeply resonate with
Mhm.
people. And this idea of there are things that we can do maybe to understand the other person and maybe have them feel more loved. And so there were two love languages that you said, regardless of what the assessment shows that are important to people. And I just thought, can you say a little bit more about what
Yeah.
you've learned about the love
Yeah,
language?
well, we have a chapter in the book that talks about kind of the myths about feeling loved. And sort of one of the myths is that, like, if only I could, if only my partner could speak my love language, then I would feel more loved. Okay, here's the thing about love languages. Everyone knows, I think, what they are. I love them. I talk about them a lot. Like, they're a great heuristic. They're fun. There's
Yeah.
something real about them, right? Because we really do vary in our love languages. But now there's all this new research that shows that kind of has debunked some of the main ideas. Sorry. So one of the main ideas is that there's supposed to be these five languages. Actually, there's a lot more than five. I don't know. There's probably 20 or 30 or whatever. Lots more love languages. One, two. What you were just mentioning, it turns out that actually there are two love languages that most people prefer, almost everyone prefers. And those two are words of affirmation and quality time. Sort of most of us want a partner who says, nice, kind things to us and spends quality time with us. And so that's kind of true across. So it's not just the case that like, oh, we need to find that person who sort of matches our love language. And the third really main finding is that the fact that I and my partner match in our love languages, which by the way is a thing, like my one of my top love languages is physical touch, and it's true. Some people just aren't into physical touch as much as I am. Um, but the fact that we match actually does not predict the duration or the success of our relationship. So that's actually a really key, debunking, right? Because we think if only I could find that person who matches, and it turns out the more love languages your partner, and by the way, it's not just about romantic partners, you can talk about families, family members, friends. The more love languages our friends and family show to us, express love to us, the better. No
Yes.
surprise there, right?
Yes.
The more the better, right? The more loved we feel.
Now, I really liked your assessment in the book, The Diagnostic, that you
Mhm.
introduced in the book. So I did mine, and
Yeah.
I am open heart mindset.
That's your strongest mindset is open heart.
Yes, that is my strongest mindset.
Okay.
And it reminds me, I used to do this thing with my husband years and years ago, when we were still married, and he's passed away now. But we used to do this thing, and I don't know why we called it this, but we called it absorbing. And here's how it went. So, I would be at home cooking dinner. It's 6 p.m. and he comes home coming home from work, and he says something that's a little offside, a little rude, not abusive, just rude, or
Mhm.
something.
Sure.
And instead of me pouncing on that and saying, "Oh, what's that about?" or getting into a bit of an argument about what that's about, or why do I deserve that, or whatever, instead I just, absorb. I'm like, I'm just going to absorb that he's had a bad
Mm.
day or something's happened, and I kind of give him that grace. And then he would go upstairs and change and whatever, and then he'd come back down and he would say, "Thank you for absorbing." He
Oh.
would recognize
Mhm.
that I did that.
Wow, I love that. And by the way, sometimes imagine if you hadn't recognized that right, that might be a bit different story. That's beautiful. Because the open heart, this is one of the mindsets we talk about. It's showing kindness, warmth, compassion, a belief in the other person, wanting the other person to be happy. And yeah, I mean, basically, it's an act of kindness, I guess I would say, for you to just, as you said, to absorb and sort of not react right away. Obviously, if that was happening repeatedly and without a good outcome, then that would be a whole different story, right? But you kind of knew. And by the way, I actually learned that like I had this commute at one point in my life, and it was just the right number of minutes that I could really kind of recover from like the work stress before coming home. Yeah, because clearly he needed that time, as you said, sort of to go upstairs and kind of settle down, settle in. And so it's good to also be aware of ourselves, like sort of yeah, not to jump right into it. But yeah, open heart. I mean, in some ways, most relationships are categorized by the open heart. I mean, we probably wouldn't be in a relationship if there wasn't warmth and and compassion and bonding and wanting the other person. If you don't want your partner or friend or colleague to be happy, then that's a problem, right?
Yeah.
um so yeah, but it's so important, right? Sort of that warmth, we don't talk about it often enough, is so important. Also to show that towards yourself as well. So we have a section in the book, right, about how to direct the open heart to yourself, and that's where sort of research on self-compassion comes in, and also how to direct the multiplicity mindset we were talking about to yourself. And by the way, we have this quiz that you mentioned, sort of this diagnostic. It's sort of a quiz that helps you think about a relationship in your life that maybe you want to feel a little bit more loved in. And then yeah, you learn kind of what is your strongest mindset and which mindset is most in need of improvement, and then we give sort of some tips for that. And then also the tips, of course, are in the book. And what's really interesting, actually, I haven't told you this. The book is about how to feel more loved. But when we first wrote it, we had finished the book. It wasn't published yet. It still isn't published, coming out February 10th. But we had a few early readers, right, sort of give us feedback. And I'm thinking of two friends they're both guys. Neither of them are psychologists. And they told us after reading the book, each of them broke up with their girlfriends. They chose to break up with their girlfriends.
Wow.
after reading the book, right? That was like really surprising to us. And what they said is they use the mindsets as a diagnostic of their relationships, which we did not predict, but we actually now think is a reasonable thing to do. And one person said to me, I realized that she's not sharing and I'm not sharing. Like they're just not talking, they're not sharing. The other guy says, she's stopped being curious about my work. She's not curious. She's not listening. Now, by the way, I'm assuming that they had communication. Maybe they went to a therapist, like they talked about it. They didn't just sort of break up after realizing that. But they realized that that just wasn't going to change. And so that was really interesting to us. So you could also use it as a diagnostic to maybe decide to walk away. Sometimes maybe you decide to walk away, and other times you work on it.
Isn't that
Yeah.
great though that they were able to have that clarity about that, right? After reading the book. And I have a friend of mine who's in a relationship and they find it, they want to listen. They're curious about the
Yeah.
other person, but the other person, their partner is not opening up and not able to share their feelings and they find it very difficult. So what do you do when somebody that you really love so much and you're curious about them and you really want to know more about how they're feeling, but they're just so closed off. Then what do you do?
Right, and there are a lot of people who are closed off. They sort of it's like they have this wall around them. We all do to some extent, and it's there to protect them, right? And so it served them somehow. It served them well in the past. So a couple of things I have to say. It's possible they're going through a time that's just really difficult, and they're just like don't have the capacity, and you need might maybe you want to wait a bit, right? But sometimes it's not a temporary thing. It's sort of not it's that's just how they are. And so you try what we suggest in the book is to really find something that you are genuinely curious about in them, like something that they really 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 lights them up, right? Yeah, and you can't fake it, right? You have to really show genuine curiosity, really like ask them questions, start small, right? And truly listen. Now, I think a lot of the time that's going to work. You can break through, and that's happened to me. Actually, I have a couple of examples. But once in a while, it's not going to work, and they're just not going to open up. And so that's a decision where you pause, you walk away, you kind of accept or you give up. So we're not saying this is like 100% foolproof once because you have to choose wisely as well. Maybe they're just not the right person for you. At least the sort of this domain. So
Yeah. And
yeah.
I mean, I've suggested some, you had a few suggestions, so I'm going to send those suggestions out
Yeah.
to my friend and, see if it's going to help.
Yeah.
And the other way sometimes that I find people break down too is when they've had a bad experience. And like, for example, my husband died. So while I have a lot of love and a lot of loving people around me and I feel very loved, that kind of romantic relationship, I feel like it's kind of closed down a bit because, like, well, why would I do that? And then to have all of this grief and so I'm sure that happens to a lot of people that they're not able to feel that love or to enter into those romantic relationships because of the
Absolutely.
grief.
Again, we're protecting ourselves from pain, from hurt and loss. But sometimes that's temporary and we can kind of break through a little bit. We know that. Of course that can happen. And so again, we start small. Pacing is really important, right? Showing a little curiosity. Gauging their curiosity. So you share with them, but you gauge their curiosity because sometimes you're sharing and they just don't care, right? And we say in the book, we need to be truly known by the other person, you need to open up. You need to make sure the other person is actually noticing that you're opening up. And you also want to make sure the other person cares, right? And so sometimes those all those things, are very hard to happen, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the things that I really liked about the book, I do work in organizations, so that's primarily what I do every single day. I work with leaders and teams on how to not only have a productive and high performing team, but also to have a team that is thriving. And your formula, sharing, listening to learn, curiosity versus judgment, multiplicity, living with an open heart, these are all things that if leaders adopted that formula could easily be applied within an organization to,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah, and in fact, yeah, absolutely. So because we talk in the book, we mostly talk about dyads, right? Sort of two people at a time, and partly because it's just easier, but absolutely it can be applied to sort of teams and groups and organizations and the workplace. And there's like we actually have a chapter where we talk about how these mindsets apply to like different types of relationships, like say parent-child relationships, which by the way, you don't share in the same way to your child than you might to your best friend, right? It's kind of obvious, but we say that. And work relationships. And actually, one of my points about work is that the open heart, or let's just use the word love. The word love is not used enough, I think, in the work context. But it absolutely can and should be. We there are colleagues that we love, or that we feel love. And by the way, we define love very broadly, right? And so I actually think we should, I love saying I love you to my friends and colleagues and, family members. Again, yeah, we should bring love back into organizations, with
I
consent.
agree. Yeah, yeah. I agree. I think it's a great word to use, and I think it's very characteristic of good relationships when we have all of those things. And in fact, we run at the Canadian Positive Psychology Association, we run the Canadian Workplace Wellbeing Awards, and what we find with the winners is most of them have good listening strategies,
Mhm.
and those are tools that they use to gather information from people, to listen to what's going on with people. But then they also have really good action loops after that to say, look, we heard you. We didn't just listen, we didn't just send you a survey. We actually heard you, and here's what we did. And that really makes people feel valued and seen in an organization. And so it
Yeah.
was really interesting to see how even just that skill set from your book
Mhm.
maps into what these highly functioning and highly thriving organizations do on a daily basis.
Absolutely. When you think about leaders or managers, right? The best leaders, right? They're curious, they're listening. They have warmth, right? They want you to succeed and do well and be happy. And as you say, and they follow up because we all want to be seen and understood and heard, right? And so these are all things that you can do to make sure people around you are seen and understood and heard and valued.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Sonia, if there was one message that you wanted everyone to walk away with after reading this beautiful book, what is it?
Wow. That I guess that if it was one message, it's that feeling loved is under your control. It's not about changing yourself. It's not about changing the other person. It's about changing the conversation. And when you think about a relationship as a series of conversations, and that is, as I said, it's very empowering. Yeah, it feels controllable. It feels manageable. Yeah, so I think that would be my message. Yeah,
Wonderful. Well,
yeah.
thank you so much, and we look forward to having it out there. I'm already ordering a number of copies to send to certain people that I think are going to be so empowered by this book. It certainly has changed me, I would say, fundamentally.
Thank you so much.
Made, yeah,
I can't wait until it comes out because the early readers have given us amazing feedback. So yeah, howtofeellove.com. Just the title of the book is our website. The quiz, if you could share the quiz, which I think people have really enjoyed taking with your audience, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
we'll
That was
do that.
wonderful. Okay.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you so much, and good luck with the launch of the book.
Thank you. Thank you. All right.